when I travel to these megachurches, they are completely isolated from the community that they exist in. They don't reach out to other denominations. They don't reach out to the public schools. They could care less about the local officials. The only two groups they ever reach out to are law enforcement and the military. And that was a pattern that I kept seeing repeated in megachurch after megachurch after megachurch. U.S. Marine Corps Appreciation Day, State Trooper Sunday. And they would bring these people in and laud them for their Christian probity. And they know very well what they're doing. That those forces of coercion within a society are absolutely fundamental if any radical movement is going to succeed.
That's Chris Hedges, and this is Alternative Radio. I'm David Barsamyan. This edition of AR features Chris Hedges on American Fascists, the radical Christian right. Over the last several decades, there has been a growth in fascist ayatollahs and mullahs in the United States. Not content with limiting themselves to religious matters, these holy rollers use their extensive media networks to expound on political issues. For example, Pat Robertson called for the United States to take out Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. He's a terrific danger whose country, says Reverend Pat, is a launching pad for communist infiltration and Islamic extremism. Imagine that. Robertson suffered no opprobrium or penalty, and he still hosts his nightly 700 Club TV show. So it's cool to advocate the assassination of an elected head of state. But Pat's small potatoes compared to the grand vision of televangelist John Hagee. Pastor Hagee says, the United States must join Israel in a preemptive military strike against Iran to fulfill God's plan for both Israel and the West. A biblically prophesied end-time confrontation with Iran, which will lead to the rapture and the second coming of Christ. To talk about American fascists and the radical Christian right is Chris Hedges. He reported for the New York Times for more than a decade. Before that, he worked for the Christian Science Monitor and National Public Radio. He's covered wars in the Balkans, the Middle East, and Central America. His book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, received the 2003 Overseas Press Club Award. His latest book is American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War on America. He spoke at the Boulder Bookstore in Boulder, Colorado on January 22nd, 2007.
I come out of the church. My father was a Presbyterian minister. My mother also went to seminary, although she became a college professor. I grew up in a small farm town in upstate New York, literally right next to the church where my father was the minister. He actually it was a very poor county, Schoharie County, and he actually had 5 churches. And on Sunday mornings he would consolidate 2 of the services, but he would get up early and I'd often go with him and hear him preach the same sermon 3 times and travel in the car with him and ask him. So at a very early age, I began getting indoctrinated with Christian theology. And I think that coming out of this tradition is important for a couple reasons. One, I'm not Sam Harris. I don't believe that religion is the cause of all evil in the world. And Sam and I have gone back and forth on this, and I think TruthDig, if anyone knows that website, is going to try and set up a debate with us in Berkeley in the spring. I have just as bleak a view of human nature and the moral neutrality of the universe as Sam. However, I also have a very bleak view of human institutions. All institutions, the theologian Paul Tillich said, are inherently demonic. And that includes the church, which anybody who's read the history of the Christian church doesn't need me to explain the bloodbaths and inquisitions and totalitarian terror that's been propagated in the name of religion, but been propagated in the name of religion. And of course, in my feeling, the misuse of religion. You know, when Sam and I went back and forth, one of the things he said was, well, do you really believe that if we didn't have these religious ideologies, these genocidal campaigns and fanaticism would exist. And I said, yes, read Freud. You know, there is something endemic and dark within human nature. I certainly saw it for the some 2 decades I spent as a war correspondent, and I chronicled, I think, this enticement and a lure of violence. That, you know, ability, we used to say in a war zone, give a teenage kid an automatic weapon and in 4 days they become God. And if they don't wrap that, and many times they do, of course, wrap it around a religious ideology, but when it's not wrapped around a religious ideology, it can be wrapped around nationalism or communism or any other ideology which claims to be propelled forward either through history or divine right towards a utopian end, and of course embraces that specter of apocalyptic violence, that belief that violence can be used to cleanse the earth, cleanse the society, and make it pure and whole. So I came at this movement as one in no way predisposed against the Christian religion, and in fact, somebody I think who's been deeply formed and continues to be informed by the Christian faith, with all of that distaste that I have for religious institutions, including Christian institutions. Certainly covering the wars in Yugoslavia, the stance of the Serbian Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church in Croatia was reprehensible. They wrapped themselves around these nationalist causes. They sanctified campaigns of genocide. They gave it a religious legitimacy. They allowed religious iconography, religious ritual, and religious language to be used to propagate the murder of innocents. There are a couple of things that happened that go into the genesis of this book, American Fascists, the Christian Right, and the War on America. The first comes as a student at Harvard Divinity School. I was living in Roxbury, in the ghetto in Boston, in the Mission, across the street from the Mission Main Mission Extension Housing Project, where for 2.5 years I ran a church as a student minister. And that was a very troubling period for me for 2 reasons. One, I had to confront the fact that I was a Presbyterian, that the church that I came from had walked out on the poor with white flight, that they were no longer in the inner city. And coupled with that came the liberal theology of Harvard Divinity School. And somebody asked me the other day how I got from Harvard Divinity School to the New York Times, and I said it was a very easy transition from one godless institution to another. At Harvard, you know, they all spoke on behalf of the oppressed. They all wanted to go out and empower the poor. But this was in the abstract, in the same way that the liberal church wanted to empower the poor in the abstract, from Newton, Massachusetts, not from the inner city. And the 2 years that I spent, and I preached every Sunday. I couldn't do the sacraments. I had the status of a deacon as a seminarian, but I could do funerals. I did 7 funerals. And the distaste that I had for the rhetoric of the liberal church and for liberal institutions like Harvard grew every day as I commuted in from the Green Line, on the Green Line into Cambridge, and came back at night to the despair of the projects. I remember, you know, for someone who grew up in a fairly cloistered environment, there was rural poverty where I grew up, but it was really nothing like urban poverty, the violence of urban poverty. And it really took living in the ghetto to understand how oppression is institutionalized in urban ghettos and how those who are poor, how difficult it is to escape. All of the forces that combine, probation officers, schools that don't work, banks that redline, all of these forces converge to keep the poor poor. Now, my great mentor at Harvard was this exceptional character named Dr. James Luther Adams, who, when I had him, he was almost 80. He taught ethics, and he told us that when we were his age, we would all be fighting the Christian fascists. And that warning came at the very time that Pat